So, welcome to episode 3 of the second series of Entangled Discussions. Today, we're lucky to have a guest who is well known in the quantum sector for taking a considered, thoughtful approach to extremely challenging topics, as well as someone I always thoroughly enjoy talking with. So, here to discuss why equity, diversity, and inclusion, combined with responsible research, are key factors in maximising scientific potential. Here's Celia Yeung of Oxford University's User Engagement for the Quantum Computing and Simulation Hub. Hi, Celia.
Hi, how's everyone?
Good. And if we can start, Celia, if we can start with a little bit about your background, how you got into quantum, the work you're involved with, just so we can get a feel for things.
Sure. So I have a PhD in electrical engineering and a background in physics. And when I left higher education, I didn't really know what to do with myself. But I joined EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Research Council. And what they do is that they are one arm of UKRI Research, UK Research and Innovation, and they fund projects which are within their remit, so engineering and physical sciences. And so I got kind of quite a broad spectrum of what type of sciences go on out there. And I had a real appreciation of, you know, the people that you don't notice doing work in the background, basically. And then from there, I moved to the University of Oxford and I worked on research services. And there I helped individuals apply for the funding that they need for their research, which was really interesting. And then the post for this job in the Quantum Computing Hub came along. I'm part of the user engagement team. And being a bit of a nerd myself in a physics background, obviously I jumped at the chance. And it's just something that I found fascinating. You know, I don't necessarily need to have all of the details about the technicalities because I'm not an expert in the field, but all of the softer skills that I've developed working in all of the other jobs that I've done to date, they've been really, really helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously the big, the theme today kind of covers equity, diversity and inclusion, as well as responsible research. So if you can sort of, take us through a little bit more about what that actually involves and I suppose how the user experience group deals with that and what your role is.
So I go into a little bit more detail in my slides that I'll show you in a minute, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done across loads and loads of sectors. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of EDNA crop up in things like cyber and AI. And these are really important because the way that these sectors are at the moment, they're in a position where they're very well aligned or in a really good position to be able to influence the future generations that are going to come to play. So with us in the hub, we do a myriad of things that address equity, diversity and inclusion. And the whole premise is to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to be able to gain the experiences or have the opportunities that any other person would be able to ensure that they can enhance themselves and enhance their careers, and then, you know, make it a better place for individuals in the quantum computing sector.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the change in phraseology from equality to equity, and obviously this is something we've sort of mentioned before, but I think that's quite a key differential in terms of the focus. So, would you mind just maybe expanding on that slightly?
I think there's a really good picture online out there somewhere where there's a fence and there are 3 individuals and they're all of different heights. So the shortest person can't always look over the fence, but the taller person can. And so if everyone were equal, they'd all be given, let's say, a box to stand on. But that might not mean that the shortest person can still see because they might not have been raised over the height of the fence. And equally the same for the tallest person, can still see over the fence, it makes no difference for them. But the person in the middle who's got a height between the two, you know, they might just be able to see over the fence. The whole term around equity means that the person who's the shortest might have 2 boxes to stand on, for example, and they're then able to look over the fence. The person in the middle who's of middle height, they have their 1 box and they can still see over the fence where they might not have been able to do so before. And the tallest individual doesn't need the box. So that's, making it an equal playing field in that sense, as being equitable to each of these individuals standing on boxes.
So an equity of opportunity rather than homogenizing everything. Excellent. And you mentioned you've got some slides to sort of help describe things a little bit further. It'd be really good to, if we could see those and you sort of take us through them.
Sure. So I will go through a little bit on what we do within the hub, and hopefully this leads us quite nicely into EDNA. So I'm hoping that you can see those slides. Everything's working.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay. So I've already been introduced. I've already given you a little bit of information about myself. I'm part of the user engagement team in the Quantum Computing and Simulation Hub. Right then. So what is the Quantum Computing and Simulation Hub? So we are part of the UK's National Quantum Technologies Programme. And this began in 2013. And since then, the programme has received over £1 billion of investment from over a 10-year period from both government and industry. And this goes towards realising the new generation of quantum technologies and nurturing the ecosystem that supports it, essentially. So the programme is delivered and supported by a number of government organisations. You can see, I don't know if I can get the laser pointer working. So we're funded by EPSRC, who I formerly worked for, and it's also supported by other institutions within UKRI. We're supported by KTN, DSTL, and BAYES, amongst the individuals here, or the organisations here. And this gives you a feel for the size and the significance of the programme and the hubs on the quantum landscape. So we're currently in phase 2 of the programme, where there've been a continuation of 4 hubs. There's a hub in quantum imaging that's based in Glasgow, one in quantum communications, which is based in York, one in quantum sensing and timing, that's based in Birmingham. And then you have our hub, the Quantum Computing and Simulation Hub, that's based in Oxford. So whilst we are located or have headquarters in these 4 locations, each hub is built of a consortium of academic institutions and other collaborators. So we ourselves are a consortium of 17 universities. Like I said, our headquarters are at Oxford, and we have support from over 25 commercial partners and organisations, and they're all listed here. So we're very well connected with the wider community, and we continue to make sure that we've got a strong network of organisations and individuals to ensure that we're able to continue with the work that we do. The technical side of our hub is made up of 11 work packages, which addresses both hardware and software. And these aim to tackle the challenges within quantum computing and simulation. So we have teams investigating ion trap processors, superconductors, photonics, and we've invested in a myriad of technologies because we believe that they have a role to play in the future, but potentially on different timescales. We also have specialists on the software side, for example, in verification, algorithms, and applications. And this allows us to work towards simulators, NISCs, which are noisy intermediate scale quantum computers, and universal fault tolerant quantum computers. On the non-technical side of the hub, this is where the user engagement team comes in. Our mission is to develop and nurture the UK's quantum computing ecosystem. So our team is made up of Everett Gertson, who's the Director for User Engagement, Rupesh, who you've met, John, you've had him on last month in your first season, so to speak. And we've got myself, and between us, we have a combination of academic and industrial experience that helps the hub reach its goals. So from these hexagons, you can see that we conduct a myriad of business. We act as ambassadors for quantum computing, we contribute to policy, and we facilitate collaborations between the quantum community. So that might be academics, industry, and with the wider community as well. And this is a very important part of responsible research and innovation, ensuring that we do get the right messages out to the wider community, and this might be the benefits of quantum computing, this might be the disadvantages of quantum computing, but we need to make sure that the wider community are confident in this technology, and essentially they have confidence when adopting or applying the technology for themselves. Amongst what we do, we always think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is what the main topic of today is going to be around. So very quickly then, I'm not a fan of reading off slides, but I think this is really important to have so everyone can see. What is equality, diversity, and inclusion? So, or equity, equality, and diversity and inclusion. So equality means the equality of opportunity. We must ensure that those who may be disadvantaged can get the right tools or get access to the right tools so that they have the same fair opportunities as their peers. Diversity is recognizing, respecting, and celebrating each other's differences. So a diverse environment is one with a wide range of backgrounds and mindsets, which allows for an empowered culture of creativity and innovation. And when you're inclusive, this means creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed, they feel valued, and an inclusive environment can only be created once we're more aware of our unconscious biases and have learned how to manage them. So when the UK thinks about their quantum workforce, we need to think about what we want, how we're going to get there, and who we welcome to achieve these goals. So, first steps would be ensuring that there's space for and a good representation of diverse talent. So every individual should be given an equitable opportunity to advance themselves. And one way to do this is to ensure that there's transparency, regarding the metrics that are used when people are being promoted. So, person X might be taking this route to get to wherever they need to be, and person Y might be doing the same, but they might be taking a different trajectory. Either way, transparency of the routes that they take and how they're measured is really important. And the added bonus is that, you don't know what you don't know. So with the transparency of these routes, organizations are able to show which routes that they take. Other people who are hoping to get to the same positions or positions which are similar can take similar avenues should they want to, and they can strengthen their own skills. So even if they're not able to get to role A or B, they have strengthened their skill set, which also would have a benefit to the company. There needs to be an accountability in leadership roles. There are courses on EDNA, unconscious bias training, etc. We have that in Oxford, and so do many of the institutions that we have within the hub. But there's also a need for leaders to cultivate a safe space for their workforce to enable the individuals to feel comfortable to be able to feed back. And they can monitor what doesn't work. And obviously this won't be the same for everyone, but it creates an environment where everybody feels valued, and this will also bring benefits to productivity. And I think it's really important if you think about the use of language. There are online tools such as Alex. I can share the link with everyone if you're interested, but this tool is used to vet the language that's used potentially in job descriptions or invitations to competitions. If you've got a competition for funding, you think about the language that's used. And these check the language that you use to see if it's more user-friendly, and that would encourage a wider participation. So specific examples of what we're doing within our hub to nurture EDNA, I've got a list here, but as I read them out, they seem like such little things, but the sum of the results actually do have quite a significant impact. So for a start, our EDNA plan is accessible to everyone. It's integrated into everything we do. So it ensures that we're accountable for EDNA within the hub. We encourage everyone to contribute and feedback. And we endeavour to have a 50-50 female-male ratio at high-level meetings. So this in itself is quite challenging sometimes, because if you're in a field such as STEM, that doesn't necessarily have the individuals in a pool that are, there's a good 50-50 split, for example, then it's going to be challenging for women to make sure that they're seen. And this is for a number of reasons. So let's say I'm an individual that's, you know, really well known in my field, and I'm in research topic X. But then everyone within the community of research topic X is going to keep inviting me to all of these events. And therefore I won't even have the time to be thinking about the research that I actually want to do, because instead of being in the lab, for example, I might be doing lots of these types of, you know, events, which is very, very important. But you have to think about how you strike a balance between the two. And I've had experience of this when I was at EPSRC. You wanted to have at least X% male, X% female on a panel, for example, but you find that you're constantly inviting the same individuals again and again to tick a box. And so it's really important to think about who you're inviting, why you're inviting them, and is there someone else that they can fill the space that might not necessarily be as experienced to give them the experience. And so this touches on the next bullet point. You know, we invite and encourage early career researchers to present at events. So you might not have a full house of key speakers, but, you know, we as the hub, we know that we're very well networked. Our audience knows the hub is reliable. And so when we're disseminating information, this gives an opportunity to those who have less experience to gain some experience and practice in their presenting. And I think this is really, really key. I've already mentioned how, you know, we think about the use of our language in agendas. We include captions on our online videos to make them accessible. And so everyone's different, you know, so, you know, some working cultures might not work for others and vice versa. And we've acknowledged this in our EDNA plan. So we know that it's always going to be a work in progress. But we've put these things in place because we feel that it's important as a hub. We recognize that it'll have an effect on developing the quantum computing workforce, and therefore it will have a significant effect on our quantum computing and simulation ecosystem. So with that, those are the things that we like to think about, and I'll just end my slides.
Fantastic, thanks.
That's just a really, really quick run through. I think, you know, you've seen some of these slides before with Rupesh. We've shared some of the hexagons, and I think loads of people hear a lot about EDNI, but I think it's important to, you know, just keep the repetition up, make sure everyone's aware, make sure everyone's comfortable with understanding what it really, really means, and then we can all move forward together.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that reinforcement is something that helps and gives us an opportunity to continue learning, continuing the development of the theme. So and we mentioned before about the analogy with the boxes. So for those people who maybe don't have the same access, what sort of opportunities are there out there to be able to engage with the community? What sort of things can they involve themselves into, you know, to help bring them to the party?
So we do a myriad of events. We do them all the way through the year. One of the bigger ones that we do are in November. So this is where a lot of industry might get in contact with us, this quantum showcase. And this is where, you know, individuals from all of the hubs, all 4 of the hubs will present what they do, and they're going to be industrial partners that show what they do as well. So it's a really good place to network, to see where you fit in the wider landscape. And then you just start asking questions. It sounds really daunting. But, you know, I don't have a technical background, and in the real world, when we're not all virtual, I have no problem just saying, oh, what's that? What does it do? And it's, you know, no one's going to judge you, because quantum technology is relatively new. We still don't really know what it can do for sure, even though, you know, technological advances are happening every day. But, you know, I always think there's no such thing as a silly question, and I stand by that all the time. So
yeah, and I second that as well.
I think we've asked each other quite a few questions, haven't we, Johnny?
Yeah, and often regretted it shortly afterwards when we realised what we just
no such thing as a silly question.
And you know, you mentioned the you know, asking questions and you know, getting involved, and within the wider quantum community, you know, what can we help? What can we do to help EDNI out there?
Well, I think EDNI isn't necessarily just a quantum thing, obviously. So there are going to be lots of sectors that adopt or take up quantum in the future. Or they're looking to do it now. And it's just to be aware that, within their own organization, there are going to be EDNI policies. There's loads of training, online, and you can just type in EDNI in Google, and you can start appreciating the things that different organizations do. And I think it's quite tricky because in the business world, I guess, you have your day-to-day tasks that need to have things that need to get done. And then there are the softer skills that you do use, but they don't always seem like a priority. So it's just constantly reminding yourself that it's not just about the tasks at hand. It's not just about, making sure you tick certain boxes. You get so much more by considering ED&I. And especially now in the virtual world, we can't necessarily see each other. So being open and making sure that we build a good rapport with the individuals that we speak to online adds so much more value to the relationships that you build. And so when it comes to quantum, this type of culture that you're kind of involving yourself in and you're welcoming, that helps build a stronger infrastructure that will take quantum further, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that really, really strikes me within the field is because we are building something new, and there is a general good ethos towards building that community in the right way. But one of the things from personal experience and from living in different countries with actually living with people from different cultures, and I found that something that really taught me a lot was experiencing a huge diversity of opinion and sort of cultural backgrounds and mindsets. And there's kind of no one size fits all approach to a lot of the topics we've discussed. So, you may have one person who's happy with something, one person who isn't. Are there any common themes to what is often an idiosyncratic dilemma?
I think when you think about one size fits all, I think it's important to know that everyone's trying to move in the same direction. They're not going to specifically pick out, oh, I don't like that because it doesn't fit in with what I believe necessarily. It's trying to think, okay, so this individual doesn't think the same way as I do. Why? And I always ask myself, why? Why do you not? Why do they not believe this? And I might be completely in the wrong. I might be very ignorant to something that I don't see the value of. And it's only when you start having these conversations that you think, oh, actually, that's a really, really good point. So the example in my presentation about the key speakers, and this came up. This was completely random, in fact. So I was trying to organize an event, and we couldn't find female speakers. And someone just came up to us and just said, so why do you have to have, really well-established academics at this event? It was just like my light bulb moment. We didn't absolutely have to, but it's the kind of thing that is kind of ingrained in our culture where you want to have these specific key people because they draw in a crowd. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with having, Joe Bloggs over there that you haven't met before, but that gives you the opportunity, because the likelihood is those individuals, the earlier career researchers, they're on the ground. They're in the labs and they see these things firsthand, and you're missing out on a massive opportunity there from learning, and the two-way learning that you get there. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and I think as well, bringing the different voices into the equation, you don't get the same mantra repeated and reinforced. You've got more opportunity to get that slightly different mindset or slightly different view to things. So and that's something I think during the pandemic we've certainly seen, where there's been so many talks and so many different voices that perhaps you wouldn't have heard at the big conferences where you actually turn up in person.
And I think you'll find that they generally, all the voices that you're talking about, they tend to move in a very similar direction. They don't necessarily pull in the opposite directions. You're kind of moving with the flow. Yeah. It's, no one ever really talks about it. And now we're in a really good place to have these types of discussions. I guess my worry though is that, I talk about ED&I all the time, and I'm sure that, my friends, when I'm out, having a meal with them or something, they're like, oh, she's talking about it again. But it's really important that this message hits home. And, you know, I think about it in my sleep, I'm sure. So trying to figure out different ways of addressing different things, because, you know, something might not work for one group of people. Yeah. You have to be flexible to think about how it works for someone else.
And that, as with these sorts of topics, it is kind of governed by zeitgeist, which doesn't stand still anyway, so that you can kind of never come to a conclusion as to what's right or wrong, because it will keep evolving. So
always.
And whilst you've been talking, Midhat wanted to say something, so please come in.
Hi Celia, thanks for the great talk. I just had a quick question. Have you encountered any pushback while doing this work? I've done some of this work in academia, and I saw a lot of pushback happening from all kinds of places. And if you have, how do you approach it? How do you encounter it?
So there has been pushback. I'm not talking about just within the hub. I'm talking about in all of the roles that I've done so far. And so if I take a personal experience, for example, I didn't necessarily realize that there was an unconscious bias in some of the studying that I did until I started learning about this. So it's really, really important that we keep repeating this again and again. When it comes to encountering negative kind of feedback that you get, I think it's really important to ask the right questions, because the individual that's pushing back doesn't always necessarily know that they are offending someone. So you could go up to them and say, have you thought about this? Or we tried this approach, but actually this organization here has tried doing these types of things, and it might work for us. And I think by opening their mind that way, it gets them to think a little bit about it, because the people that I've worked with previously, they're really lovely people. I don't think they ever meant to offend me in any way, but they don't realize it. And, you know, by encouraging them to do things like unconscious bias training, that also helps. But obviously, by this point, the scenario that you're talking about, that time's already gone. So you can try to start implementing things for the future. But I think asking the questions in the right way helps lead individuals to think, oh, have I done something wrong? Because a lot of the time they don't realize that they're thinking within a very small box.
So, George, you're not war.
Yes.
And obviously, and sorry, Midhat, did you? I saw your mic come on, so apologies. I interrupted.
I was just going to say thanks.
And so I'd like to sort of come back to the EDNI theme, but the other side of the conversation was the responsible research aspect.
Yes.
You know, it'd be good to sort of take your view on that and sort of start to break that side of the talk down.
So a lot of the things that we do in the hub involve responsible research and innovation. So in the world that we live in now, media jumps on anything. So if you take, I think we discussed this before, John, but, you know, if you take GM foods, there are so many people, you know, researchers, they try really, really hard to try and solve world hunger, for example, make more sustainable crops. And the type of headlines that you get in the news, things like mutant vegetables, you know, they're going to ruin everything. And I think it's really important to make sure that these types of headlines don't crop up in this way. So, you know, with quantum computing, there is a level of there are a level of unknowns. We don't fully appreciate what quantum computing can do yet, because we've not actually implemented it. There are loads of question marks. Theoretically, there are loads of things that we can do, but there's potentially a negative side to all of this. And so we need to think about how we address it. So, okay, this might happen, but we've put these things in place to make sure that it doesn't go awry. Those are the types of things we're thinking about. So you don't want, I love this this example that Rupesh always gives. You know, quantum computing essentially implants some idea in your head, and then something goes wrong, and everyone kind of goes around like mindless drones. You don't want it to spiral to that point. And it's the same way that with mutant vegetables, you know, that could have been some really, really good research there. And now the media they've spun it in a certain way that the public doesn't adopt it. And then this, you know, sets everything back, because it doesn't matter how much funding you get. if the wider community doesn't jump on board, then there's no point investing in something. And this is a really, really big thing. So, as part of the work that we do in the hub, we talk to different sectors, we try to find out what they're trying to do, trying to align with their strategies. And then when we do this, we make sure that the messaging that goes out, we are fair, we are objective, and we're responsible about how we present this. And then, hopefully that helps the wider community adopt these technologies. And it is for the better in the long run. So you have to think about the pros and cons constantly.
Yeah, see, from my vantage point, there seems to be kind of two strands to that, and there's the kind of the future ruining power of things, and we're going to have Terminator or whatever it might be. And then the Frankenstein food example. But then there's kind of the other side, which is almost dampening expectations, because if you're not careful and the public press gets hold of they see a peer-reviewed report, then they kind of distill it into, well, quantum computing is going to do absolutely everything you can possibly imagine. It'll make the best breakfast you've ever had, and all sorts of things.
There is a potential for quantum computing to cure cancer. There is if the quantum computing technology had been perfected by now, we might have had a COVID vaccine like that when it struck in last year. The thing is that whilst it does have all these potentials to it, we might not be able to see this until the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what's really important as part of responsible research and innovation, because there are going to be people who are investing in quantum computing, and if they are expecting a turnaround by tomorrow, then it's not going to happen. So it's really important to keep these things in mind. And whilst companies are doubling, tripling the amount of successful qubits that they have, every month, every quarter, etc. You need to think about what these qubits can actually do. And so, if you measure the success of a company or a technology by, oh, we've got X qubits, oh, and then the next person the next day says, oh, we've got 2X. It doesn't necessarily mean anything unless it can actually do something useful. So you really need to think about the marketing that's got put into it and the actual value that can come out from the technology. So, okay, yeah, maybe quantum computing might have a significant effect on Bitcoin or something of the like, but you don't need to worry about that for a little while yet, because we aren't, it's not at the stage where it's able to actually have that much of an effect.
Yeah, and I think, and it's quite good to see actually, because you've got people like yourself that are coming at it from the public side of it, if you like. But then also on the flip side, you've got some big private companies that have had brand ambassadors and almost sort of learning from things like the hype around Watson or AI or .com, and trying to sort of prevent that bubble before we get to that stage. I'm not sure it's always helped by everything that dishwasher tablets and everything else having quantum in front of it, and things that clearly aren't any, that don't really relate to it in any way more than general life. But it's really interesting to see that juxtaposition that both public and private are pulling in the same direction to get the message, the right message out, and not have it interpreted by the press or minimize the opportunity for the press to misportray that.
I think it's really important because even now we're seeing more and more sectors, more and more different companies. They're starting to, if you just see like a job, the generic jobs, adverts. I think Vodafone recently had a quantum researcher. I was like, oh, that's interesting. What are they researching? But I think from the job description, they were looking for individuals that kind of scoped what was going on in the landscape and see where it may fit into their organization. So this was just me, off the fly looking and seeing what kind of things were out there. But it kind of gives you a good feel of where organizations are now thinking about how quantum might fit into their system, and is it the time for them specifically to invest? And it's really, really interesting to see, there's been a wealth of interest coming up recently. And, we get loads of messages to the hub saying, oh, what does this do? Or can you give us a little bit about X, Y, and Z? And then in phase one, in our previous carnation NKIT, we had a program that introduced different companies to what quantum was, the potentials of it, etc. Just this first step for them to get onto the boat so that they can see where it's going to take them. And it's entirely up to the different organizations to decide when they want to, change their little rowing oars to an actual full-size engine and along. But it's up to them to decide. And I think it's really important to make sure that they have the opportunity, but also recognize when's good for them as an individual company. Because obviously loads of people don't want to be left behind, but you don't want to invest too early if you think everyone's a little bit further, like the technology is behind what you need as a company.
And it's interesting actually with recruitment, there's lots of people that have sort of thought quantum will be a good idea since the pandemic started that are now experts. So that kind of perhaps management of expectations is pervasive, and I think it's interesting that up until, I suppose, things changed a little bit last year, I think, for a number of reasons, both the technology but also the way that that things were publicized and people met and were more engaged online, and it seems that the noise surrounding quantum computing has really echoed in that time, and it's interesting, so before that there was a lot of kind of fundamental research. A lot of people were, from a scientific background. Now we're seeing more efforts towards the marketing side and strategy and sales and all different sorts of other business skills coming in, which is also bringing people from outside of that core scientific or engineering function. And obviously up until this stage, it's been a lot of the ethos has been about trying to create things in the right way. And I'm wondering, as more established organizations or different mindsets come into this, how the EDNA and responsible research, how that can be maintained or implemented as the ecosystems gets wider and more distributed.
Take the example of the hub. We try to ensure that everyone has a good opportunity to get to where they want to go. So if you think in a very enclosed black box where you might have only a specific characteristic succeed, we within the hub have an environment that encourages all different individuals to succeed. And so in that case, when they move forwards, when they take up the positions, like in Google or Rigetti or, at IBM, etc., they are there. You can't ignore them because essentially the pool of people from your closed black box system has now been opened. And this is where we are in a really good place to push ED&I forwards. And also alongside that, I think the way that we encourage this message for sectors that are already quite well established, I think when they see how successful quantum is because of the diversity within the sector, they're going to, if they haven't already engaged with it, they'll jump on board even more. And I think that's really, really important as well. And, at the end of the day, people want a nice place to work in. They don't want to kind of have to feel, oh, I can't say X, Y, and Z because I can't put my hand up on my, knock on the hands or anything like that. I think it's, you do want a nice place to work in and encourages productivity.
And I suppose it's keeping that consistency of effort and making sure the message is adapted to what's happening and also kind of trying to future-proof it a little bit as well.
I think that's definitely the key. I mean, I think there's also flexibility. If you're going to be quite rigid, then that is completely the opposite of space to grow, isn't it? Because if you stay really rigid, someone decides that they're going to say, oh no, I don't like that, and the majority say no, I don't like that, then you're going to fall behind because you don't want to move with the crowd. There's just that type of thing you've got to think about, really.
Yeah, and I suppose with anything, as it distributes and becomes larger, it's harder to maintain that mantra, and I suppose it'll be a case of it finding its own equilibrium, and hopefully that fundamental ethos holds true, and as you say, the benefits and advantages that come with that. And well, obviously, as you know, Celia, I could sort of sit here and talk to you all day about a whole wide range of topics, particularly this. But does anyone else want to come in and maybe raise a question or ask anything with regards to the themes we've discussed?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what when you describe the what's happening out there and the fact all the work is going on, but coming from a major national organization like you were, and then now working on something a bit more specific, but do you find there is changes on a bigger scale, or is it kind of on the local scale?
I think there are pockets. So from my experience, because I'm part of the university as well as part of the hub, the university itself, like many universities, they do really, really try their hardest to tackle EDNI. There are a lot of policies within, so I'm just speaking for the University of Oxford here right now, but I don't know how many emails that I get on a constant basis, in a good way, that bring up EDNI. They welcome individuals to be at this talk, or if you've got time, etc., come and join us for X, Y, and Z. And I guess it's really important, because if you think about it, I've got a small child, I work part-time. So if I can't attend something on a Monday or a Friday, there's always going to be repetition of it somewhere else in the week where I can join it. And I think when you are in a smaller organization, you might not be able to have the space to be able to do that, because your time is very limited. You can't necessarily always repeat it. You don't always have the resource to repeat it. What I think is quite useful about doing things online is that there are so many things that I've not been able to attend on a Monday or Friday, but I can click on the button when it's published and I'm able to address it another time. So there are things that can be put in place to ensure that you are inclusive. But you know, it depends on where you are. I've been really lucky in the organizations that I've worked for and worked with. And I think it's up to the other organizations that might not have taken these thoughts on board as much to think about how can they make everything more accessible. So typically, you know, if you think about ED&I, some people's brains might go to immediately to, you know, men and women, or some people might think about, you know, the individuals who are abled against those who are disabled, or they class themselves as disabled. And so you might think of little things like, you know, steps versus a slope. But actually, there involves so many more things you need to think about within all organizations. So is there going to be a school run at 3 o'clock? I don't know what time everyone comes back and goes to school in other countries, but in the UK, is there going to be a meeting at 4:30? Quite a lot of parents in the UK need to start moving to go to school to pick up their children a lot of time before that, so they're going to miss a meeting. It's just trying to implement the little things. So I think for me, I've been quite lucky in working with organizations that have been quite flexible. And I think there are a lot more organizations that are taking this on board. So it's not going to be local as much as it previously has been. And I'm hoping that, you know, this type of culture and this type of flexibility kind of spreads across all sectors, and that will just help everyone. Maybe I'm just an optimist.
And I think as well, perhaps the mechanism to go from local to global, or to interact between the two is another theme that often isn't discussed. So how did you see that there's sort of strands between the two that can be implemented, or do you think there's a different mindset needed for the macro compared to the micro?
I think there is a different mindset that is to be needed. If you think specifically, if you take the example of, you know, you're a multinational company and you've got offices in one place and offices in another, and the culture is completely different. There are strands that you can actually pull across from each other. You know, you learn by best practice. And that's not to say, you know, this part of the organization has to implement everything on this side and vice versa for it to work. I think it, as I mentioned before, it is a work in progress. You need to find what does work, what things or items, you know, within the policies that you roll out, what you do find are the most beneficial for you, what works within that culture, and they won't be the same. But at least you've tried them, and two, you've had the opportunity to try them. And then, you know, there might be something where you have an amalgamation of the two, and that works for everyone, and it just gets rolled out across the shop. That might work as well. I think the biggest key thing here is flexibility, and realize that, you know, no one really likes change. You know, if you're really honest, who really likes change? So it's having that support there to guide people through the change curve, explain how things are going to work, why you need to implement them, what the goals are, and then allowing people the space and the time to evolve with you as you move along and grow together.
Yeah, so that kind of, you know, flexibility, diversity of opinions, and adaptability, I suppose.
I think it goes back to some, you know, the answer that I gave earlier. Sometimes you just need to ask the right questions, or ask it in the right way for people to think, oh, actually, why have I had that opinion for such a long time? And sometimes there's not actually any negative reason to it. It's just like, oh, you're very free to adopt another opinion. Why not go ahead?
Yeah, and I remember actually a few years ago, I can't remember the topic, but someone asked me why I thought something, and they said something would, you know, this was X, and I said it was Y. And they said, why do you think that? And I cast my mind back, and it was because I think when I was an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old had told me that, and it had kind of stuck, because when you're 8, a 12-year-old is, you know, the gospel. And then I thought back, and I suddenly broke it down, and I didn't realise that what I held on to as a concrete opinion wasn't really based on a solid foundation. So there's certainly a lot of merit in that.
And I think there's a lot of wiggle room in quantum, because we don't have any 100% confirmations for sure. We can't say that's exactly it. So we are all open-minded. Yeah. We are embracing everything that's coming, whether it be, you know, the softer side or the technological side. So we're in a really good place. And it's, you know, it's really, really exciting to say, oh, actually, I didn't think about that. Oh yeah, you've got a really good point. And then you can just integrate that into the way that you know, move forwards.
So using the power of probability for entanglement. I'm gonna have to think of that as a strapline or something for entangled positions. And I think, you know, again, that way you phrase questions and engaging with people, it does lend itself nicely to the scientific community, where reasoned debate is encouraged rather than being insular and enclosed. And I think it'd be interesting to see, as quantum becomes more pervasive into everyday life, how that translates. Because coming back to Rupesh, you know, as he said, quantum doesn't discriminate, so why should we? And I often think with quantum and obviously this topic as well, what things will look like in, you know, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and things always seem to move quicker than expected. But, I mean, what would you see as the sort of the natural line of progression, or what would you hope for moving forward?
So you know, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, okay, so if I can picture what quantum looks like in, let's say, 3 years, there's nothing stopping me from thinking, actually, I want it to be this, and get to this. So I guess that's not from a necessary, you know, from a technological side, you want a universal fault tolerant computer. Would be the ideal, wouldn't it? But that's not always necessarily going to be the case. You know, it just depends on what resources we have, etc. at the time. I think in terms of EDNA, I think it's really important to think about, okay, so this is our goal that we have here, and we have a lot of different strands to get, like routes to get to this particular place. What can we do to think about trying to get there? And have we closed down avenues? Because if we've closed down these avenues, has there been a good reason? And this comes back to what we were saying just now. You know, you've got to ask yourself the right question in the right way. So if you think about the individuals that you might involve in an organization, the people that you're going to employ, if you have a specific set of people that are all exactly the same, you're going to miss opportunities around those people. You're not going to recognize them. So you need to think about not necessarily what you think it's going to be, but it's also what you want it to be, and then figure out how you're going to get there. There might not be a right or wrong answer, but you know, you're trying. And I think that helps with creating that space that makes everyone comfortable to be able to put their 2 pence in and say, have you tried this? Or this is a good way of doing it. And I guess exactly that as well. The way I've just phrased it is, have you thought about this? Not you should do it like this.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting actually, as someone who's in the process of hiring and scaling the business themselves, it's interesting actually because that mindset of what can people bring on board that maybe I'm not that good at? What areas can they cover off? What things can people bring that are different to what I've got? And that strength, that inherent strength that comes with that. It's it comes back to what you mentioned earlier about it not being, it's not a box ticking exercise. It's actually what is productive, what works, how to be most effective and efficient. And I wonder whether that mindset, or that not having had the right questions asked, whether that closed mindset is something that reinforces itself. Whereas actually, when you start looking into these things and what the potential benefits or effects of this are, whether that rabbit hole keeps going and going and going, and it becomes it kind of snowballs.
I think that that does happen sometimes, but there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, we've looked too far out the box now, because obviously with the hub, for example, we are in a very, very unique special place that we can implement a lot of things that will have a significant effect on the ecosystem in the future. However, obviously we can't go out to every single company or organization that we collaborate with and say, this is our EDNI policy, you need to do it as well. So there has to be some level of balance, and this goes back to not one size fits all. So for example, I hope our hub program manager doesn't mind me saying this, but we had a discussion once where I'm very comfortable with using they instead of saying him or her. And I think that partly comes from my culture, where we might say they do this. So if you translate in Chinese, you can pretty much, you say they a lot. You don't necessarily know what gender the individual is until you see it in writing. Or you use their name. But my hub manager just always says, oh, they kind of sometimes confuses me, because he never knows if the individual or individuals are singular. And so, there's a lot of little things like that. And obviously knowing our hub manager is a lovely person, we get on really, really well. And he doesn't mean to, he doesn't say it in a horrible way. It's just, I've never thought of that, because for me, it never occurred to me. It's just implanted in a different way in my mind. So I think, when you think about how you're going to, I don't want to use the word push the agenda, how you try and influence others, it's very tricky, particularly because one size doesn't fit all. And I think trying to be sensitive and using the right language to approach someone or a different organization to see how they might respond, and then just be flexible on the way back.
And I suppose as well, it's something as simple as asking a question rather than making a statement, that kind of thing, probing the thought process and evolving things that way. Because I think with some of these topics, it's quite easy to take a mindset and reinforce that, and sort of reinforce that mindset rather than ask the questions and evolve that. And do you know, with everything, that there's always more we don't know than what we do know.
Yeah, so I think once you've asked yourself a question, you might end up asking yourself questions, which that's okay as well, because it's all a learning curve. I think, since becoming a mother, I try to implement trying to get my child to learn for himself. I want him to figure it out himself. I don't necessarily always want to do things for him. And I think that's kind of given me a better appreciation of, actually, maybe whomever I'm talking with doesn't actually know X, Y, and Z. Maybe they just need a little bit more guidance, and they don't want to put their hand up and say that they don't know. So there's also, I think, a skill in that, just kind of dropping hints enough so they don't feel like they're patronized, but so they've got enough information to go away and find things out for themselves. And I think that also contributes to relationship building, particularly in the quantum community as well, because I don't know everything that goes on in a lab. And if we were, in person in the real world, I'm the kind of person that probably kind of rock down to a lab and say, hi, how's this working? But other individuals might not have that confidence in being able to do so. And I think, leaving breadcrumbs for people who are completely in a different type of mindset to the way I am, that's also adding value, because then they have the opportunity to further themselves, as we've discussed before. You're giving them the opportunity to go out there and look for themselves.
And I'm quite conscious, as you mentioned your son, I'm quite conscious we were due to go for exactly the hour. So Celia, as always, it's an absolute pleasure speaking, and I think I certainly
Thank
think
you for having me.
Oh no, you're welcome. You're welcome. You know that, and there's plenty more opportunities to come back on Entangled discussions. You've got my number. Just let me know as and when. You're always welcome. And yeah, hopefully that the people watching live and on the recording have learned things from today, or got the mindset to ask questions. And certainly, if anyone wishes to bring anything up with myself, or indeed, I'm sure with Celia, we're both approachable. And yeah, once again, thank you very much for that, Celia. And as a slight bit of promotion for other things happening this week, I'm actually involved with a multifunctional panel with Fabian Bock on Thursday, and also speaking at Inside Quantum Technology again on Thursday. I will be publishing the details on LinkedIn, so it would be great to see any and all of you there. So once again, though, Celia, thank you so much for today.
Yeah, we'll see you next week when everyone talks together. That'd be great.
Oh yeah, final piece of promotion that I absentmindedly forgot, the most important one. We're back here at the same time next week, Tuesday 4:30 BST, where all of this month's guests will come back for a panel discussion. So that's Nigel Sidki, Cristobal Suarez, and obviously Celia from today. So thank you everyone, and until next week, see you soon.
See you later.